Hey y'all, it's your girl Aaron, and I wanted to make a video talking about politics again, specifically USA, and there's been a lot that's happened lately, so I thought I'd chime in. The 2 points I wanted to cover mostly were the discussion around whether the people who stormed the Capitol should be called terrorists or not, and then the other one is with Trump being banned from Twitter, there's this discussion about censorship and that kind of thing. So to begin with, the people that stormed the Capitol, well, the word terrorist or terrorism, that label has almost exclusively been used by the states or whatever states, uh, and almost exclusively referring to non-white people, people of color, as a way of making them seem, villainous or evil or something dangerous, that it's okay to retaliate against them, lock them up, or whatever it is. So it's, it isn't applied equally racially. That's the important thing to begin with. Secondly, well, this is something that's kind of my own take, I guess, is that terrorism itself, it's not just, you know, oh, you did XYZ thing, then you're a terrorist. Like terrorism, you can think of it as like ideologically, like it is the attempt to instill an environment or like a pervasive feeling of terror or fear in, an environment or population. So it's meant to make people like afraid to go outside or even to exist in their own home. That's the goal. That's what terrorism, as terrorism, not as what the state calls it, but what it would actually be if we were using it, in a way that made sense. So a bunch of like Trump fanatics trying to overtake the Capitol that had no chance of actually changing government really, could have potentially been dangerous to the politicians and stuff that were there, but it doesn't really create this environment of fear everywhere. Um, you know, not much more than Trump supporters already are, just by the fact that they support Trump. Their support of Trump creates more terror than what they did there. Like, unless you were actually there, like, so what? Like, it's unfortunate that there were casualties and stuff and people getting hurt, but for the most part, you're just like, this is just people who are seriously confused and, not doing things that are helpful, clashing with police who are also like not really that great, and it doesn't really scare, like maybe it scares some people, but like that also wasn't their goal. Like their goal wasn't to make everyone in the USA afraid that, if they ever try to elect a Democrat, they're going to get stormed. Like that wasn't the vibe. The vibe was the election was stolen. We need to make sure Trump doesn't go out of office, that kind of thing. So it didn't create this environment of terror. Meanwhile, if you look at something like the States, especially not so much in like rich or like the more Caucasian populated suburbs and areas, but in like most of the places, the police actually are the biggest contributors to feelings of terror and create that sense of being afraid, especially if you are a person of color or black, where the police have demonstrated that they don't really have any regard for your life. They can even like go into your house when you're asleep and kill you and not get charged with murder for it, and things like that. So the police actually function as terrorists, domestic terrorists in that case, and they are actually creating that kind of environment of terror. That's not what the Trump rioters were doing. So I don't think terrorism is a good fit. Now, there's the legal side of it, and I think you you can call them insurrectionaries, you can call it a coup attempt, but I don't think it should be called terrorism. That just doesn't make sense to me. And it also makes light of it because, you know, these are people that the states, for the most part, is not opposed to. The state spends a lot of time using terrorism as a label to promote, white supremacy. And so a bunch of white supremacists trying to establish white supremacy, it doesn't really gel with that. So let's get on to Trump being banned from Twitter and the free speech and stuff. I don't really want to go into it, but there is the argument about the First Amendment, which is something in the USA about free speech, whatever. Like, the First Amendment's to protect you from government censorship, not corporations. So that's not really what's happening. And just a side note, Antifa means anti-fascist, not anti-First Amendment. I know that should seem obvious to most people, but not everyone knows that. But in regards to censorship, now I think it's really important to understand that words aren't just like air, words aren't just like the things that have no impact on others. Words can hurt people. Now, I would say that hate speech and speech that is intended to hurt people, stuff like doxing, cyberbullying, that kind of stuff, I think that does go into the realm of violence. I don't think criticism, insults, or whatever, like, goes into the level of violence. So you can criticize someone as much as you want, but if you use like a slur or you make it about them being like personally like not like valid or whatever, that is going into forms of violence, but it isn't. It needs nuance. It isn't like this black and white thing where like you said this rude word and now that's violence. Like, you have to take things into context and stuff and see the use of the word, like how it was used and stuff like that. But for the most part, I would say, unless you're doing hate speech, cyberbullying or doxing or something that has like those kinds of either like hateful or like violence or like attacking or invalidating or oppressive language, trying to reinforce the systemic oppressions that already exist, all that kind of stuff can be violence. And I guess a way to think of it is like if you're punching down instead of punching up, that can be considered a form of violence. And so that's why I think it isn't out of the question for organizations, companies, or even governments to have certain censorships as long as those are rooted in practical outcome-based, logic, not just because we don't like this word or whatever. Like, it must be because it's a word that actually causes damage to people. So like, you could think here in South Africa, there are certain derogatory words and slurs that were used by the apartheid government and the racist people who lived here, and some still do. And those words, are considered hate speech. And, if you were to like use those words on the radio or whatever, it can actually result in some kind of penalty and stuff like that. Like, it's not a free fall, okay? And that's because like, so when your collective decision making process is broken, like everything breaks. And so when you should be able to collectively as a society decide which words aren't appropriate and shouldn't be tolerated, when that process is broken, obviously you're going to have to worry that the words that end up being censored might not actually be words that should be censored. At the same time, like, and we're talking about words here, but it also, I guess we need to talk about people at some point. But specifically, what I'm coming to is the point that it's a free-for-all isn't necessarily a good thing. The people have often said, like, the counter to like bad speech is good speech, and while that's true, in an idea sense, like the counter to a bad idea is the better idea. But when words are actually causing harm to people, hurting people, making them feel invalidated, bullying them, exposing them, making them vulnerable, that the counter to that isn't to just have like, oh, please stop, or this is bad, because you're actively being harmed. And if you think of like, if you're physically attacked, you can try and attack back in self-defense. I know about that firsthand. And so, what defense do you have to someone cyberbullying you? You're not able to get a mob to go after the person bullying you. And I don't even think you should try, but the point is that you need some ways of limiting it from just everything being okay. And when we come to platforms, like there's certain online forums that have historically, like recently there's the whole Parler thing, but there's like Chan boards and stuff in the past that have been seriously like hotbeds for the growth of fascist movements and recruiting and stuff like that. And the far right loves going into those spaces to agitate for people. And in those spaces, there's often, this free-for-all concept where like nothing is off limits. You can say whatever you want, post whatever picture you want, etc. Okay, sometimes they have like one or two specific things you can't for legal reasons, but and what ends up happening in those spaces is that anyone who doesn't want to see very negative content, like very violent, very racist, very bigoted, like gory, or whatever. Anyone who doesn't want to see that content gets driven away because other people go into those spaces and post those kinds of content because they want to scare those people away, because they want only people who are either okay with it or looking for acceptance or a place they can fit in with so badly that they'll ignore it. And so that ends up like, basically you can think of it like almost everyone who would be on the left in such a space is not going to want to stick around there because of all the like right-wing nonsense going on and all the hate. And so there's just free reign for the far right to recruit as much as they want and stuff. And so that's why I don't think this idea of like a free-for-all is actually that great. I think what my takeaway or my principle I follow is you need to be tolerant of everything except intolerance. So things that are intolerance and things I mentioned before, like doxing and cyberbullying and stuff, hate speech, that is intolerance. And so you can be tolerant of anything you want except for intolerance, because if you tolerate intolerance, then you don't actually have tolerance. Like the people who you want to be able to accept and give platform to and have a voice to, if they are able to just be victimized and abused without any consequence, then they're either going to shut up or go somewhere else. And it's not really an open platform. An open platform requires some amount of civility. Now, you can go the opposite way and start tone policing people and being like, if you swear or if you say something angry or if you use the wrong word, your entire point is cancelled or you are cancelled or whatever. And I think that is also unhelpful. And we've seen people like AOC do that to people like Jimmy Dore. So, that's also a problem. And